know on this practical. So again, just remember, Tuesday you got your practical, make sure you show up at time, blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot of pathways to know, not just from this chapter, but like you gotta know like the pathway of food through the digestive system or the pathway of the air through the respiratory. But here you gotta know the path of urine through the urinary system, and you gotta know the path of blood. You know, chances are I'm not gonna just ask you to regurgitate this whole thing, but it'll be more like along the lines of like, I'll tell you one thing and then I might say like, for example, you're in the PCT, what comes after the PCT? And you'd have to be like the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Or, you know, you're in the cortical radiate arteries, what comes just before the cortical radiate arteries? And you'd have to say arcuate arteries. So I'll go through that with you in a second, but just make sure you know it really well. Also, this is information that could pay off not just in the practical next week, but also on the next lecture exam. So it's good to know it for that too. I'll go through these models that are up here. Everything that has a asterisk next to it, you'll also need to identify in the fetal pig. I wrote that stuff over here, and I'll go through that up here as well. Now, the stuff that has a hashtag on it, that was supposed to be on the sheep kidney. Now, there were no sheep kidneys that I could find, unfortunately. So you don't have to find that stuff on the sheep kidney. You still need to be able to find all this stuff on plastic models or diagrams or whatever, but you don't need to find it on the sheep kidney per se. So I'll go through that. Microscope slides, there's really not that many. It's just the kidney and the ureters. I'll go through that as well. So just to be clear, you are responsible for the fetal pig stuff, but you don't need to know the sheep kidney stuff. So here is tracing the path of urine through the system. So the first place that urine shows up is going to be in Bowman's space, right? That's your preliminary urine. From there, the urine goes into the PCT. By the way, you're welcome to use PCT as an abbreviation. That's fine. So you go into the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. From there, you then go into the descending limb of the loop of Henle. You then turn the corner and go back up again. That's the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. Then you go into this other squiggly part, which is the DCT, the distal convoluted tubule. Then you're in the collecting duct. Then you're in the papillary duct, and then the urine drips out of that papilla. The papilla is like the tip of each pyramid. So to switch over to this diagram, each one of these things is a pyramid, and then at the tip of it, that's the papilla. The urine drips out of the papilla, and it gets caught by a minor calyx. So each one of these things you see here is a minor calyx. Now sometimes the minor calyces dump right into what's called the renal pelvis, like these guys do. Other times you'll have two or more minor calyces combining to form a major calyx, and then it dumps into the renal pelvis. Whatever. Anyway, all the urine eventually gets dumped into the renal pelvis, and then the ureter carries it away. Obviously from there, where does it go after the ureter? Bladder. After the bladder, it goes to the urethra and then outside the body, right? So that's basically the path of urine through the system. Now, the path of blood through the system, this was basically taken directly from the PowerPoints from before. I will run through this, but I'm not going to do it right now. I'll do it on the model that we have here, so I will come back to that and go through it. Whoops. Okay, so let's go through these models then. So first it says the torso, pelvis deal. So we do have this, I should have brought it up before. We do have this little model, and then you've seen this like a gazillion times. It's not that tough, but let me show you anyway. So this is like a mini torso model. And on this thing,
I'll try to upload it.
you got the, there's not really all that much you can see here, but basically you got the kidneys, right, which are fairly easy to see. Then you got the ureters coming out of them, there, sorry, and there. And then this big thing in the middle here would be the bladder, okay? That's about all you can see on this mini torso model. We do have a separate model for the bladder, which is, actually let me put this away. That's how I lost that, I knew it. So we do have a separate model for the bladder. I don't know why this model is like so huge, but it's like this enormous bladder model. So this By the way, is this a male or a female bladder? Anyone know?
Female?
What's the correct answer?
Male.
Male. It's a male bladder.
All of
How do you know it's a male bladder?
The prostate.
Yeah, this is the prostate. These are the seminal vesicles back here. Don't worry, you don't have to identify male from female. I was just telling you so in case you were wondering what these things are. What should you know on this? Well, these are the ureters here. There's one ureter. There's the other ureter there. These things going over top you don't have to worry about, but if you're wondering, that's the vas deferens coming over top of each of those. Right? This would be like your anterior view. Now, the muscle that makes up the wall of the bladder is called the detrusor muscle, which like literally translates into push down, because it kind of pushes down when it's contracting. If you open the bladder up and look on the inside, there's a couple of things you should be able to identify. First of all, you've got this triangular shaped structure that's here, and at the corners of the triangle are one ureter over there, that's the opening one ureter, that's the other ureter over there, and then at this point down here, you have the opening of the urethra. So if you connect those three, you make this thing that looks like a triangle that they call the trigone. And that's like the lowest part of the bladder. Like when you're standing, when you're sitting, that's the first place where the urine will start to build up in that trigone. Now, let me put one half away here and talk about some other parts here. So if you go in a little bit closer then, sitting in the wall of the bladder right here would be the internal urethral sphincter, and it's made out of smooth muscle. You got the urethra going through here. Now again, this is a male model, so this is the prostate that's sitting here. What this model is not showing you, and I'll show you a different model, it's not showing you the external urethral sphincter. The external urethral sphincter would basically be cutting across down here, and it's going to be made out of skeletal muscle. So let me show you this male reproductive model that you looked at when we did the reproductive system. I'll show you that. Okay, so on this, if you kind of pull this apart here and look, just to get your bearings. So there's the bladder. That's actually the opening of one of the ureters there. You can kind of see the trigone area there highlighted. That's the opening of the urethra there. So if you were there, that would be where the internal urethral sphincter is. Then you've got the urethra leaving. And then this muscle right there, which is basically just a continuation of the pelvic floor muscle, that makes up the external urethral sphincter, and it's made out of skeletal muscle. Okay? So that's what's going on there with the external urethral sphincter. Now, let me go back to the big model here. This model, there's a lot going on in this model. So basically what they've done on this model, if you looked at it, is they've just given you three separate parts of the kidney, like at different levels of magnification. So this would be like the whole kidney, right? And then this is like a close-up of a pyramid, basically. And then this is a close-up of like a renal corpuscle, okay? So I'll walk through this into the different parts and kind of tell you what to see on each. So when you're looking at the kidney, this region in here, where the ureter comes in and where the blood vessels are connected, this would be the hilum area. Surrounding the outside of the kidney, very thin membrane called the capsule, the renal capsule. If you go just below the renal capsule, you have this area that's kind of light tan out here. That's going to be the cortex. And then if you go into the deeper area where you have the pyramids, etc., that's going to be the medulla. When you look at the medulla, again, the triangular things that you see here, those are the pyramids. And then in some places you can kind of see a little bit of tissue in between the pyramids, like here or like over there. You see some. That's going to be the renal columns that are in between the pyramids. All right. Other stuff to look at on here to notice, again, the tip of each pyramid, that would be a renal papillae. And then catching the urine as it drips out, each of these things would be a minor calyx. In some cases, the minor calyx or calyces is the plural. Sometimes the minor calyces empty directly into the renal pelvis, which is this area here. Other times, like over here, you have one minor calyx, another minor calyx, and then they come together. So technically, like at this point, it would be a major calyx, and then it empties into the renal pelvis that way. All right, the nephron. So to talk about the nephron, I got to go to the second part of this model. So this is basically like a pyramid here, and they're showing you the two different types of nephrons that we talked about in lecture. This guy here is going to be a juxtamedullary nephron. Notice that the renal corpuscle part, which is right here, sits pretty close to the medulla, which is this area down here. Also notice that it has a nice long loop of Henle that goes deep into the medulla. Whereas this guy over here, its renal corpuscle is more out in the cortex itself, and it has a much shorter loop of Henle that doesn't go into the medulla as deeply. So that's a cortical nephron, that's a juxtamedullary nephron. All of those little white things that you see there, those are all renal corpuscles, and I think the artist that designed this model just didn't want to make it too busy, but each one of these things would have their own tubules and things, right? I don't want you to be confused. They just didn't show it on this particular model. All right, so when you look at the nephron, there's the two parts. There's the renal corpuscle, and then there's all the tubules. So let me take this one for example. So this would be the renal corpuscle part, and then everything else is going to be the tubule part. When you look at the renal corpuscle part, there's two parts to it. There's the blood vessels on the inside, which are called the glomerular capillaries, or you can just call them the glomerulus. Either name's fine. And then there's the part that surrounds it in white there, and that's going to be the renal capsule, or you could call it the glomerular capsule, or you could call it Bowman's capsule. Actually, you probably shouldn't call it the renal capsule because that implies that you're referring to the capsule that surrounds the entire kidney. So call it either the glomerular capsule or call it Bowman's capsule. So that's the renal corpuscle. As you leave the renal corpuscle, you go into the tubules. The first tubule you come to is the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubule. Then you go down in the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Then you make a sharp turn and you go back up again in the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. And then this little twisty turny part would be the DCT, the distal convoluted tubule. And then you'll have a collecting duct. Okay? Now, sometimes the collecting ducts go straight to the papilla, or sometimes they connect up with papillary ducts. Don't worry so much about that little detail. It's just something to be aware of. Now, another thing I wanted to show you is the juxtaglomerular apparatus. The juxtaglomerular apparatus is a portion of the nephron where the last part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle comes, and it sits really close to where the afferent arteriole is. And there's a lot of important cells that are in that juxtaglomerular apparatus. If you were looking at this portion of the model, this would be like the last portion of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, and then this would be the afferent arteriole. So roughly this area here is going to be the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Or if I looked at this other nephron, basically like this area in here would be the juxtaglomerular apparatus. But what does it look like in more detail? Then you got to go to the third part of this model, which is over here. So on this part, essentially, this whole thing is the renal corpuscle. The thing on the inside is the glomerulus. You got, Bowman's space sitting inside here. This represents the beginning of the proximal convoluted tubule. This is the afferent arteriole coming in, and then that's the efferent arteriole leaving. What you're seeing here in this kind of greenish yellow color, that's the last part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. And in the wall there would be some kind of pushed together cells that they refer to as the macula densa. So that would be right there. Sitting right next to it, over here, is the wall of the afferent arteriole, and in that wall are some specialized smooth muscle cells called the juxtaglomerular cells. So this whole area here would be the juxtaglomerular apparatus, okay, in close-up. All right. now let's go back to the blood vessels and work our way through that on this model. I mentioned I'd go through it, and I wanted to, but I just wanted to have this model to help me out here. So, start big and go kind of small. So first of all, you're going to start with the renal artery. The renal artery is going to be connected to the abdominal aorta. Then these branches that come off of it, I'm going a little closer. These are going to be the segmental arteries. And then coming off of the segmental arteries and running in between the pyramids are like this guy here, or this here, or that there, or that there. Those are the interlobar arteries.
Where?
As the interlobar arteries pass between the pyramids, they then make a sharp kind of 90-degree turn, and they kind of run along the base of the pyramid. So you can see them turning and running along the base there, or like there. You can see it running along, or even over in this region, you can see how it runs along. When it runs along the base like that, it's called the arcuate artery. And then notice it makes another sharp turn and heads straight out into the cortex area. So all those little branches that are going straight out into the cortex, those are called the cortical radiate arteries. Now they also go by the name interlobular arteries, but just be careful if you decide to go that route, because interlobular sounds a hell of a lot like interlobar, okay? These are the interlobar, whereas those would be the interlobular. I think honestly it's probably easiest to just call these cortical radiate and not worry about it, but if you want to like live dangerously, knock yourself out. Now, after that part, you can start to see it on this area here. Then you're going to go into the afferent arterioles. But the best way to see it is to just switch to the next part of the model. So let me give you your bearings here on this part. So on this part, this red guy here would be an interlobar artery. Then as it turns and it goes across the base here, it's an arcuate artery. And then as it turns and it goes out like this, or it goes out like that, that's going to be a cortical radiate artery. Now, coming off of the cortical radiate arteries then, you get into the afferent arterioles. So all these branches that you see coming off there, those are afferent arterioles. And they're going to go in to the renal corpuscle, and they're going to become the glomerulus. And then leaving, it's a little hard to see over here, but you can see it on this side, leaving are going to be the efferent arterioles. The efferent arterioles then go into these peritubular capillaries, or if it's a juxtamedullary nephron like this one, coming on, and it's a little weird how I don't really like how they kind of did it on this model, but also kind of coming off of this peritubular capillaries, if it's juxtamedullary, you'll have the vasa recta. On this model though, and it looks like it's a branch on the cortical radiate, which isn't necessarily correct, this is the vasa recta on this model. In reality, this whole thing would be kind of juxtaposed on top of these long loops of Henle. Again, the vasa recta are specialized blood vessels for the juxtamedullary nephron, specifically for the loop of Henle of the juxtamedullary nephron, so you can kind of see it over there, right? So that would come next if you had a juxtamedullary nephron. After that, after you get past the vasa recta or the peritubular capillaries, that's where the veins start. And the veins basically name themselves by going backwards from the names that you had for the arteries. So this guy in blue here would be a cortical radiate vein. And then this guy in blue that's coming across like this would be an arcuate vein. And then this guy that's in blue going down here would be a interlobar vein. You then have to switch back to that bigger model to see the other parts. So just to help you out here. So these would be cortical radiate veins in blue. This would be the arcuate vein in blue. Then as it goes down in between the pyramids, it becomes the interlobar vein. Then like the segmental veins, and then eventually the renal vein. Okay. Now, sometimes the interlobar like will directly dump into the renal vein, so you may or may not see a segmental vein, but don't worry, I'm not going to give any questions that'll like trip you up with that. I just want you to be aware of that. All right. Next, let me do the fetal pig, and then I'll finish up with the microscope slides. So we'll start with the digestive stuff first, and the first thing they have is the esophagus. So if you look up here in the neck area, go a little bit closer. Okay. There's the trachea. You can see the stripes of the trachea. But if you kind of loop behind it like this, that's going to be the esophagus. It's basically that muscle. There's no cartilage in it. But that would be, I know it doesn't look like much, but that's the esophagus on the fetal pig. And it's going to sit posterior to the trachea, right? If we continue our way down, not much to see in the thoracic cavity, at least for these labs. So you get into the abdominal cavity, and this big guy here, of course, is going to be the stomach, which is pretty easy to see. If you retract the stomach superiorly along with the spleen, and you look behind it then, that's where you should find the pancreas. And so this is the pancreas here. Whoop, I'm tearing off the tail, I didn't mean to do that. That's the pancreas. You can actually see like the lobulations that are there if you look like closely. So I know it doesn't look like much, but that is pancreatic tissue. It's kind of got these little sort of loculations to it. I don't know how else you would describe it. If I back up again, and not hit that thing, whatever the hell that was. If I back up again, keep backing up. There we go. You've got this whole big thing, which of course is the liver. If you retract the liver and you look on the underside, sitting right there, okay, that's the gallbladder, okay? Sometimes it'll look a little bit more greenish than it looks here, but anyway, that's it, sitting on the underside of the liver. You know, it's usually pretty firmly attached to the liver, and when you take somebody's gallbladder out, that's the toughest part, is carefully removing that from the liver without making the liver bleed a whole bunch, right? All right, small intestine. So all of this stuff here is small intestine, okay? The large intestine on the fetal pig is kind of weird. It's not like humans. They have something called the spiral colon, which is what you're seeing here, that kind of goes back and forth, okay? It doesn't really resemble ours in the sense that, I mean, this whole thing is sort of kind of located in the right lower quadrant, then it goes up, and then it comes across, and then it goes down, but we don't really have anything that looks like this spiral colon. But that would be the large intestine in the fetal pig. Whoops, closer. Notice though, you can kind of see the haustra. You don't really see the tinea coli, but you can see like the little haustra, the little the little kind of sacs that are present. Okay, so that's all large intestine that you're seeing there. Everything else over there was small intestine. This is all large intestine. For the urinary, it's pretty simple. It's just the three things: the kidneys, the ureters, and the bladder. So if I retract all of this stuff upwards and kind of look back here, you got your two kidneys. There's the left kidney. Over here is the right kidney. Attached to the kidneys are the ureters. So there's a ureter there, and then there's one over there on that side. Those are the two ureters. And what they're going to do is they're going to come down. They are going to go behind a bunch of other things. There's some little blood vessels and nerves running in here. But if you trace this and follow that ureter, and this is a female fetal pig. This is the fallopian tubes and the ovaries. If you do follow those ureters, they will eventually connect up with this thing that's right in the middle. That's the bladder, okay? So if you do this kind of move, if you remember we did this before, those, by the way, those are not the ureters there. If you recall, those are the umbilical arteries. But the thing in the middle is the bladder. And these guys actually are, it's kind of hard to see where they're connected, but they are connected down there to the bladder, which is right in the middle. Okay? So that's about it for the urinary system. Kidneys, ureters, and then the bladder. Now let me do the, let me do the microscope slides. Oh, locks me out. Okay, we covered that. Let me go, where is it? Okay, so this is a microscope slide of like an entire kidney. I don't know, this is not from a human. I don't know what animal this is from exactly. It's kind of a simplified looking kidney. It's got basically like one renal papillae. Anyway, out here would be where the capsule is. This whole area that's sort of darker pink would be the cortex, and then this area in here is going to be the medulla. This would be the papilla sitting right there. Out in this area is where you're going to find the renal corpuscles. And then down in this other area are where you're going to find like the loop of Henle and the collecting ducts and things like that. If you do a super duper close-up of just the cortex, you'll see something like this. And all of these little things here are renal corpuscles sitting in the cortex. If I were to circle the whole thing would be a renal corpuscle. If I just circled the stuff on the inside, then you should say glomerulus or glomerular capillaries. Obviously, the white area would be like Bowman's space, and then the cell, that like the layer that kind of makes up a surrounding part, that would be like Bowman's capsule that's on top of it. Okay. Now, all these little circular things that you see around here, those are going to be like either DCT or PCT, but this magnification here is not real great to show you the difference, so I'll show you a better close-up to tell the difference between the DCT and the PCT. This, on the other hand, is basically at the end of a papillae, and all of these things that are coming towards it would be like collecting ducts, basically. All right, here is a close-up of one renal corpuscle. So again, the whole thing would be a renal corpuscle. The stuff on the inside would be the glomerulus. This would be Bowman's space. The thing surrounding it would be Bowman's capsule. And then the question is, what's all these other round things that are scattered all over? And the answer is they're either DCT or they're PCT. How do you tell them apart? Well, PCT has microvilli lining the cells on the inside. And when you cut and make the microscope slide out of it, all those microvilli kind of die and they fill up the lumen. So if the lumen looks kind of cloudy on the inside, and if you have kind of these sort of light purple, pinkish, big frothy looking cells, that's going to be proximal convoluted tubule. So this, probably that, this up there, that up there, that's all going to be like those guys over there. That's all going to be PCT. If the wall stains a little bit more darkly, has a little bit more darker prominent nuclei, and if the lumen looks more clear, then it's going to probably be DCT, distal convoluted tubule. Okay, the distal convoluted tubule doesn't have the microvilli. By the way, they call the microvilli the brush border, right? They kind of stole that name from the small intestine. So the DCT would be like this guy, or like this guy, or probably that guy too. Maybe this guy, it's a little hard to tell. Okay, I'll show you some other ones. So again, whole thing's the renal corpuscle. This is the glomerulus. That's Bowman's space. This is the Bowman's capsule. And then the question comes, what are the PCT versus the DCT? Again, most of these guys I would say are probably PCT. This guy up here, that guy over there, right? Versus, you know, this, or like maybe this up here, right? Or this, where it's a little bit more clear lumen, darker staining nuclei and cells, that's going to be DCT. That then brings us to this, which is the ureter. And the ureter is made up of an epithelial layer on the inside. It's a transitional epithelium, which ends up looking a lot like a stratified squamous epithelium, okay? Just beneath the epithelial layer is the lamina propria. And then in the outer areas, you have muscle, okay? And there's two layers to the muscle, although it's admittedly a little bit hard to see the two separate layers. But the innermost layer, is going to be longitudinal, and the outer layer is going to be circular. And that's just the opposite from what you saw in your digestive system. Okay, so it's flipped around like that. So some of these layers out here would be circular. Some of the layers that are a little bit deeper in are going to be longitudinal. Okay, all this other junk that's out here is like adventitia. It's just kind of holding the ureter in place. But this is the ureter proper. The rest of it's just kind of anchoring in place. Here's a photo where they kind of removed the adventitia. I mean, technically, it would be kind of this fat tissue and other stuff that's around here. So on this one, this is the transitional epithelium. The lamina propria is kind of squeezing its way in this area or in between some of the epithelial layers, so that would all be lamina propria. And then the rest of this out here is the muscle layer. And again, it's kind of hard to see the two separate layers, but just know that the inner layer should be longitudinal, which means on a view like this, it means that the muscle fibers are coming out towards you, right? Versus the outer layer is going to be circular, which means the muscle fibers are going around in that kind of a direction. Okay? All right. One more with a little bit more detail here. And you can kind of see the difference, I guess, with the muscle layers a little bit better. So this is the transitional epithelium. This would be lamina propria in here and kind of going around here or over there a little bit. And then all of the rest of this is the muscle layer. These muscles are more or less kind of coming out towards you. They're longitudinal. Versus like these guys out here, you can see they're kind of going around in a circular pattern. Okay? Just the exact opposite from the intestines or from the GI tract. All right. Any questions about any of that stuff? Good. Okay. Well, have a good weekend. Any questions?